I am Timothy, 32 years old, and for most of my life I was the unwanted child in my own family. Growing up as the other child while my sister Natalie basked in the golden glow of my parents' adoration nearly destroyed me. The years of emotional turmoil and struggle to find my worth left scars that took decades to heal. But I finally broke free from their toxic web of favoritism and rebuilt my life on my own terms. Before I share my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever felt invisible in your own family. Trust me, you are not alone in this journey. My earliest memories of feeling different began when I was around 5 years old. At the time, I couldn't quite put my finger on what was happening, but looking back, the signs were unmistakable. My sister Natalie was only 2 years younger than me, but somehow she occupied a completely different position in our family hierarchy. I remember sitting at our kitchen table, proudly showing my parents a drawing I had made in kindergarten. My teacher had even put a gold star on it, telling me it showed real creativity for a 5-year-old. My father, Richard, glanced at it briefly, muttered something about it being nice, then immediately turned his attention back to the newspaper. My mother, Diane, hardly looked at all, busily preparing dinner with her back to me. The drawing ended up in a drawer somewhere forgotten. Just a week later, Natalie came home with a scribbled mess of colors that barely resembled anything. My parents reacted as if she had painted the Sistine Chapel. My father lifted her up, spinning her around the living room. My mother gushed over every crayon stroke immediately, placing it on the refrigerator with our best magnet. I remember staring at her artwork compared to mine, confused about why hers deserved such celebration, while mine was disregarded. This pattern repeated itself constantly throughout my early childhood. When I learned to ride a bike without training wheels, my accomplishment was met with a distracted nod. When Natalie did the same thing a year later, my father took the entire day off work to record videos and celebrate. He bought her ice cream and called both sets of grandparents to share the exciting news. Birthday parties were another area where the disparity became painfully obvious. My celebrations were simple affairs with minimal decorations, a basic cake from the grocery store, and maybe 1 or 2 friends invited over. For Natalie, birthdays transformed our home into a festival. My parents hired entertainers, ordered custom cakes, and invited what seemed like half the neighborhood. I would watch from the sidelines as Natalie opened piles of presents, while I had received only a handful on my own birthday. At first, I tried to understand why. Was I doing something wrong? Did I need to be better somehow? I started putting extra effort into everything I did, thinking that perhaps I just needed to try harder to earn the same love and attention that seemed to come so effortlessly. My sister. I brought home perfect spelling tests, learned to tie my shoes earlier than most kids my age, and tried to be helpful around the house. None of it seemed to matter. The one time I got a B on a math worksheet, my mother frowned and asked if I was having trouble in school. When Natalie struggled with reading and brought home notes from her teacher about needing extra help, my parents immediately embraced her, assuring her that some kids just learned at different paces and there was nothing to worry about. One particular memory stands out painfully clear. I was 7, and my father was teaching Natalie to ride her bike in our driveway. He spent hours running alongside her, encouraging her, praising each wobbly attempt. When I asked if he could help me learn to catch a baseball for an upcoming school activity, he looked annoyed at the interruption. "Just wait your turn, Timothy. Can't you see? I'm busy with your sister right now," he said sharply. His turn with me never came that day or the next. I ended up practicing alone, throwing a ball against the side of the house until a neighbor took pity and helped me for a few minutes. When I fell and scraped my knee badly enough to bleed through my pants, my mother told me to wash it off and stop making such a fuss. "Boys need to be tough," she said dismissively. Later that same week, when Natalie got a paper cut, my mother cradled her as if she might bleed to death, applying ointment and a bandage with surgical precision, then offering her cookies and milk to help with the trauma. By the time I turned 8, a terrible thought had taken root in my mind. Maybe there was something fundamentally wrong with me. Maybe I was simply unlovable in some way that Natalie wasn't. This fear was confirmed one evening when I overheard my father talking to my mother in the kitchen while I was supposed to be in bed. "I don't know," he said, his voice carrying up the stairs. "Natalie just has that special something. She's so much like you all, personality and charm. Timothy is just so serious all the time." I sat on the top stair, my small hands gripping the banister as my mother murmured her agreement. In that moment, a piece of my childhood innocence crumbled away, replaced by the cold understanding that in my parents' eyes I would always be second best. Elementary school became my refuge and battlefield simultaneously. In the classroom, I found validation that was absent at home. My teachers praised my reading ability, my neat handwriting, my quick grasp of mathematics. Each gold star and positive comment on my assignments was a tiny victory proof that someone noticed my efforts. I threw myself into academics with the desperate hope that if I brought home enough, as my parents would finally see me as worthy of the same love they lavished on Natalie. Report card day became a ritual of anticipation and inevitable disappointment. I would proudly present my straight A's and my parents would nod, sometimes offering a cursory, "good job," before moving on to more pressing matters like what to make for dinner. Natalie, meanwhile, struggled with basic subjects. Her reports showed C's and the occasional B, with teacher comments about her being easily distracted and talkative in class. Rather than holding her to any standard, my parents immediately leapt to her defense. "She just learns differently," my mother would say. "Not everyone is naturally academic. And besides, she has so many other talents." They hired private tutors for Natalie, spent hours helping her with homework, and celebrated wildly when she managed to bring home a B+. Meanwhile, my straight A's were simply expected, hardly worth mentioning. The irony was that I often ended up helping Natalie with her homework when our parents were busy. I'd sit with her at the kitchen table, patiently explaining fractions or helping her practice spelling words. She rarely thanked me, and my parents never acknowledged these sessions. It was simply assumed that I would help another family responsibility that fell invisibly on my shoulders. As we grew older, the financial aspects of this favoritism became increasingly obvious. When Natalie expressed interest in ballet lessons at age 9, my parents immediately found the money in our middle-class budget. When she decided 3 months later that she preferred piano, they rented an instrument and paid for weekly private instruction. Each new interest was encouraged and funded without question. The same year, I asked to join the science club at school. The fee was $25 for the entire semester, a fraction of what Natalie's hobbies cost monthly. "We really need to watch our spending right now," my father said, looking uncomfortable. "Maybe next year, Timothy." Next year never came. I eventually saved up my allowance to join on my own. My world increasingly narrowed to books and solitary pursuits. I built elaborate models in my room, lost myself in science fiction novels, and took long bike rides alone through our neighborhood. Being by myself was easier than witnessing the obvious preference my parents showed for my sister. In 5th grade, I spent weeks working on a project for the school science fair. I researched, experimented, and carefully created my display on solar energy. The night of the fair, I stood proudly beside my project, having won first place in my grade. I kept looking toward the entrance, hoping to see my parents walk through the door. They never came. Later, I learned they had attended Natalie's piano recital instead, even though she had only been playing for 4 months and hit more wrong notes than right ones. My trophy sat on my desk for months, unacknowledged by either parent. It was my friend Kyle who first put words to what was happening. He had been to our house many times and had witnessed the dynamic between me and my sister. "Your parents play favorites big time, dude," he said bluntly one afternoon as we rode our bikes. "It's messed up how they treat you compared to your sister." Hearing someone else validate what I had felt for years was both painful and relieving. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't just being overly sensitive. The unfair treatment was real and obvious enough for others to notice. The physical spaces in our home told the same story. My bedroom remained the same from early childhood, a basic twin bed, a small desk, faded blue paint on the walls. Natalie's room underwent regular transformations as her interests changed. My parents redecorated it completely when she turned 10, adding custom shelving, a new canopy bed, and an expensive stereo system. They painted her room purple because she casually mentioned liking the color one day at dinner. Family vacations were planned entirely around Natalie's preferences. If she wanted to go to the beach, we went to the beach even though I suffered from sunburns easily. If she expressed interest in an amusement park that became our destination despite my fear of roller coasters, my suggestions were dismissed as impractical or not fun for the whole family. Christmas mornings became an exercise in maintaining a brave face. Each year, the pile of presents under the tree was visibly lopsided. Natalie receiving twice as many gifts as me, and invariably hers were more expensive and thoughtfully chosen. One year, she received a new bicycle video game console and designer clothes. I got a sweater in the wrong size, a generic sports equipment set I had never expressed interest in, and a gift card to a bookstore. The message was clear: I was an afterthought in my own family, worthy only of leftover consideration. By the time I turned 13, the pattern had solidified into an unchangeable reality. I no longer expected fairness or equal treatment. I stopped asking for things, stopped sharing my accomplishments, stopped seeking their approval. The quiet, painful realization had taken root in my heart. This would never change. In their eyes, Natalie would always be the sun around which our family orbited, and I would remain a distant, forgotten planet cold in the shadows. High school should have been a time of discovery and growth. For me, it became a period of deepening isolation from my family. I channeled my pain into achievement, throwing myself into academics with an intensity that sometimes alarmed my teachers. If I couldn't earn love at home, I would earn recognition elsewhere. By junior year, it was clear I would be valedictorian of my class. My GPA was perfect, my test scores exceptional. When the official announcement came, my parents' response was tepid at best. "That's nice, honey," my mother said, barely looking up from preparing Natalie's favorite dinner. She was celebrating making the junior varsity cheerleading squad. "Just don't let it go to your head," my father added, actually wagging his finger at me. "Nobody likes a show-off, Timothy." That same evening, they took dozens of photos of Natalie in her cheerleading uniform and called both sets of grandparents to share her news. My academic achievement warranted no such fanfare. Meanwhile, Natalie coasted through high school with a solid C average occasionally, bringing home B's in her easier classes. Each of these mediocre report cards was celebrated as if she had achieved academic brilliance. "Look at this, B in English," my mother would exclaim. "We always knew you were a natural writer, sweetheart." The disparity extended beyond academics into the practical preparations for our futures. As college approached, I discovered something that felt like a physical blow. My parents had been saving extensively for Natalie's education while assuming I would find another way to pay for mine. "You're so smart, Timothy. You'll get scholarships," my father explained when I confronted him. "We need to make sure Natalie has options, since academics aren't her strong suit." The unfairness of it was breathtaking. I had worked tirelessly for years, maintained perfect grades, participated in extracurricular activities, all while being emotionally neglected. And now I was expected to find my own way through college while they financially supported my sister, who had put in minimal effort. I got a job at 16, working evenings and weekends at the local grocery store. Every paycheck went straight into my college fund. The silver lining was that the job gave me legitimate reasons to be away from home, sparing me hours of watching Natalie receive the attention and support I craved. Not everyone in the family was blind to what was happening. My grandfather, William, my father's father, began to take a special interest in me during my high school years. He was a quiet, observant man who had built a successful small business through hard work and determination, qualities he recognized in me. "They're wrong about you, Timothy," he told me during one of our private conversations in his workshop. He was teaching me woodworking, a skill my father had never bothered to share with me. "What they're doing isn't right, and someday they'll regret it. Until then, know that I see you. I see how exceptional you are." Those words were a lifeline during the darkest periods. Having just one person in my corner made the difference between surrender and survival. The tension at home escalated as I became more aware of the injustice and occasionally voiced my frustrations. Each attempt to address the favoritism was met with denial, deflection, or accusations. "You're just jealous of your sister," my mother would say dismissively. "You always want to make everything about you," my father would counter. "Why can't you just be happy for Natalie when good things happen to her?" These gaslighting responses made me question my own perceptions and feelings. Was I overreacting? Was I the problem? The self-doubt added another layer of pain to an already unbearable situation. The double standards became increasingly blatant. When I stayed out 30 minutes past curfew at a study group, I was grounded for a week. When Natalie came home 2 hours late from a party, my parents accepted her flimsy excuse, without question, relieved she was safe. If I expressed anger about something, even in a controlled manner, I was labeled as having attitude problems. When Natalie threw full-blown tantrums over trivial disappointments, my parents soothed and coddled her. Richard, my father, had never found common ground with me. He was a former high school football player who valued athletics over academics. Despite my achievements in school, he rarely showed interest in my activities or accomplishments. With Natalie, it was different. Though she had little athletic ability, he attended every cheerleading competition, cheering wildly from the stands, and taking her for ice cream afterward, win or lose. My mother, Diane, was no better. She and Natalie shared a love of shopping and gossip, spending entire Saturdays at the mall together. I can't remember a single activity my mother and I shared, not one tradition or hobby that was just ours. The constant emotional neglect took its toll. By senior year, I was experiencing periods of depression and anxiety. I became withdrawn at home, speaking only when necessary. My parents noticed this change in my behavior, but characterized it as me being moody or difficult. The possibility that their treatment might be affecting my mental health never seemed to occur to them. "You need to snap out of this phase, Timothy," my mother said when I was quietly reading alone in my room instead of joining a family movie night where, once again, Natalie had chosen a film I had no interest in. "Your attitude is bringing everyone down." My high school graduation should have been a celebration of my achievements. I was valedictorian, had received a full scholarship to a prestigious university, and had overcome years of emotional neglect to excel academically. My speech at graduation received a standing ovation from the audience. My parents attended the ceremony sitting stiffly in their seats, while other parents cheered and took photos. There was no celebration afterward, no party to mark this milestone. My father awkwardly shook my hand, my mother gave me a quick hug, and we went home to a regular dinner. 2 years later, when Natalie graduated with no special honors or distinction, my parents threw an elaborate backyard party. They invited extended family, her friends, even neighbors. There was catered food, decorations in her school colors, and a professional photographer. My father made a tearful speech about how proud they were of their baby girl. I sat in the corner of our backyard during that party, watching the celebration of mediocrity, finally understanding a painful truth. I had suspected for years my accomplishments would never be enough, because the problem had never been about what I achieved or didn't achieve. The problem was simply that I wasn't Natalie, and in my parents' eyes, that would always be my greatest failing. Leaving for college was like taking my first full breath after years of slowly suffocating. The campus of Westlake University became my sanctuary, a place where my identity wasn't defined by being Natalie's less favored brother. For the first time, I was judged solely on my own merits, and I flourished in this new environment. My scholarship covered tuition, but I still worked part-time at the university library to pay for books and living expenses. Despite the financial strain, the freedom was worth every sacrifice. I could go days without the gnawing pain of comparison and rejection that had been my constant companion at home. I called my parents every Sunday out of a sense of obligation rather than desire. These conversations followed a predictable pattern. My mother would provide brief, disinterested responses to my updates about classes or campus life before eagerly shifting to news about Natalie. My father rarely came to the phone at all. During my sophomore year, I met Jessica in a literature class. She was intelligent, compassionate, and saw me in a way no one except my grandfather ever had before. Our friendship evolved naturally into romance, and for the first time I experienced what it felt like to be someone's priority. After dating for several months, I finally opened up to Jessica about my family situation. We had been sitting in her dorm room studying when a care package arrived from her parents, full of homemade cookies, family photos, and a sweet handwritten note. The contrast to my own family experience was so stark that emotion overwhelmed me unexpectedly. Jessica listened without interruption as I haltingly described years of being the less favored child. When I finished bracing for her to dismiss my feelings, as oversensitivity as my parents always had, she surprised me. "Timothy, that's not normal," she said firmly. "What you're describing is emotional neglect, and it's not okay. It's not your fault, and you didn't deserve it." Her validation cracked something open inside me. I'd spent so many years doubting my own perceptions, wondering if I was exaggerating the disparity in treatment. Having someone believe me without question was both painful and profoundly healing. With Jessica's support, I began to see my family dynamic with new clarity. Each visit home became increasingly difficult as I could no longer pretend that the treatment I received was acceptable. The distance I maintained wasn't just physical but emotional and necessary protection against the hurt that still awaited me in my parents' house. During my junior year, the contrast between my sister's treatment and mine reached a new level of absurdity. Natalie dropped out of community college after struggling through just 3 semesters. Rather than expressing disappointment or encouraging her to persevere, my parents fully supported her decision. "College isn't for everyone," my father said with a shrug when I called home and heard the news. "She's thinking about trying massage therapy school instead." I bit back the obvious response that perhaps if she'd applied herself even half as diligently as I had, she might have succeeded. Instead, I listened in growing disbelief as my father explained they were continuing to fully fund Natalie's apartment car and living expenses while she figured out her next steps. Meanwhile, I was working 20 hours a week in addition to maintaining a full course load and honors status. My parents had never contributed a single dollar to my education or living expenses. The injustice of it burned like acid. The Thanksgiving of my senior year marked a turning point. I brought Jessica home to meet my family, hoping her presence might improve the dynamic. Instead, it highlighted every dysfunction in painful clarity. My parents barely acknowledged Jessica beyond cursory greetings before focusing all their attention on Natalie's new boyfriend, Brad. They asked him detailed questions about his family, his studies, his career ambitions. They included him in family stories and inside jokes, making sure he felt welcome. Jessica sat beside me, increasingly uncomfortable as she witnessed firsthand what had described to her. After dinner, as Jessica helped my mother clear the table, I overheard Natalie asking for money to fund a spontaneous trip to Cancun with Brad. "We can't really afford it right now," my father hesitated, "but you'll see what I can move around in the accounts. I want you to have this experience while you're young." I stepped into the living room, unable to maintain my silence. "Dad, are you serious?" I asked. "You're going to pay for Natalie's vacation with her boyfriend of 2 months while I've been working through college without any help from you?" The room fell silent. My father looked at me with genuine surprise, as if the comparison had never occurred to him. "That's different, Timothy," he said dismissively. "Your situation isn't the same." "You're right," I replied, years of repressed anger finally surfacing. "I've worked for everything I've ever had. I've maintained a 4-point GPA while working part-time. I've never asked you for anything. And yet you've given Natalie everything without her even having to try." My mother rushed in from the kitchen, her face flushed with indignation. "Timothy Andrew Davis," she scolded. "How dare you speak to your father that way, and on Thanksgiving?" Jessica stood in the doorway, her expression a mix of shock and support. My sister lounged on the couch, examining her nails, as if my emotional breakdown was a minor inconvenience in her day. The situation deteriorated further at Christmas. After flying home during the expensive holiday season using money I'd saved from my campus job, I watched in disbelief as Natalie was presented with a brand new car complete with giant red bow like in commercials. My gift was a department store sweater and a $50 gift card. Something inside me snapped. 21 years of suppressed hurt and anger poured out in a confrontation that had been brewing my entire life. "Do you even realize what you've done?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "My entire life you've shown me that I'm less important, less valued, less loved than Natalie. Do you know what that does to a child? To grow up knowing you're unwanted in your own family." "Timothy, you're being ridiculous," my father blustered, his face reddening. "We've always treated you and your sister exactly the same." The blatant lie pushed me further. "No, you haven't, and it's insulting that you won't even admit it. When have you ever celebrated my accomplishments? When have you ever put my needs first? Name one time." My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances, unable to provide a single example. "This isn't about material things," I continued. "I don't care about the car or the presents. This is about 21 years of being treated like I don't matter, and am done pretending it's okay." The argument escalated as my parents defended themselves, accusing me of being selfish, ungrateful, and jealous of my sister. Not once did they acknowledge any wrongdoing or show any willingness to consider my perspective. As the shouting reached its peak, I made a decision that would alter the course of my relationship with my family forever. "I'm done," I said quietly, a strange calm settling over me. "I'm done trying to earn love that should have been freely given. I'm done hoping you'll change. I'm done pretending we're a normal family when we're not." I packed my things that night, declined Jessica's offer to stay with her family for the remainder of the break, and drove back to campus 800 miles away. As streetlights illuminated the highway, stretching before me, I made a vow to myself. I would never again place myself in a position where my worth depended on my parents' validation. I graduated with highest honors from Westlake University the following spring. My name was called, followed by summa cum laude, and polite applause filled the auditorium. In the sea of faces, I searched for my family but found only Jessica and her parents, who had generously treated me as one of their own over the past year. My parents had claimed a sudden illness prevented their attendance. I later discovered through social media that they had been at Natalie's dance recital the same weekend. Some patterns never change. With my degree in finance and glowing recommendations from professors, I secured a position at Anderson Financial Advisors in Chicago, 800 miles from my hometown. The distance was intentional, a physical manifestation of the emotional boundary I needed to establish. Gerald Thompson, a senior advisor at the firm, took me under his wing. He was everything my father wasn't: patient, encouraging, and genuinely invested in my growth. Under his mentorship, I developed confidence not just in my professional abilities but in my worth as a person. You know, Timothy, Gerald told me one evening as we worked late on a client presentation, I see something exceptional in you. Not just your analytical skills, though those are impressive. It's your resilience. Whatever life has thrown at you, it's only made you stronger. If only he knew how much those words meant coming from a father figure who actually saw me. My relationship with Jessica deepened as we navigated the challenges of early adulthood together. She accepted a teaching position at a school near my office, and we moved into a small apartment, creating our first home together. The contrast between my relationship with Jessica and what it observed between my parents was striking. Jessica and I communicated openly, treated each other with respect, and shared responsibilities equally. There was no favoritism because we were both equally valued. This healthy dynamic felt foreign but wonderful, proving that the dysfunction I grew up with wasn't normal or inevitable. Contact with my family dwindled to occasional text messages and obligatory holiday calls. Each interaction left me emotionally drained, reopening old wounds that never fully healed. My parents seemed incapable of having a conversation that didn't center around Natalie, her latest job prospect, her relationship drama, her apartment troubles. Even in my absence, the pattern continued. My mother called once, not to check on me or express interest in my life, but to casually mention that they had helped Natalie with the down payment for a condo. The unspoken contrast hung in the air. I had received no such assistance and had never expected it. At Jessica's gentle urging, I began seeing a therapist specializing in family trauma. Dr. Howard helped me understand concepts that illuminated my entire childhood: the golden child and scapegoat dynamic, emotional neglect, and the long-term psychological impact of parental favoritism. What you experienced wasn't just uncomfortable or unfair, Dr. Howard explained. It was a form of psychological maltreatment that affected your core sense of self. The fact that you've achieved what you have despite this speaks to your extraordinary resilience. Through therapy, I began the painful process of accepting that my parents might never acknowledge the harm they had caused or make meaningful amends. I had to find healing without the closure I desperately wanted. Natalie contacted me sporadically during this period, almost always when she needed something: a loan to cover rent when she quit another job without having a new one lined up, advice on a career path she would abandon within months, money for car repairs because she had spent her savings on a spontaneous trip to Miami. I declined these requests politely, but firmly suggesting resources that might help her develop independence. My refusals were met with incredulity, as if my boundary setting was an incomprehensible betrayal rather than a healthy response to decades of inequity. During my third year in Chicago, I received an unexpected call from my Uncle Frank, my father's brother. We had never been particularly close, but his message surprised me. "I want you to know, Timothy, that some of us saw what was happening," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "I should have said something years ago, and that's on me. But I want you to know that what your parents did wasn't right, and not everyone in the family was blind to it." His acknowledgement brought tears to my eyes. The validation from someone who had witnessed my childhood firsthand was powerfully healing. As Jessica and I approached our 4th anniversary, I proposed during a weekend trip to Lake Michigan. Her joyful acceptance felt like another step away from my past and toward the future I was building on my own terms. The question of whether to invite my family to our wedding sparked weeks of difficult conversations and soul-searching. Jessica, always my advocate, supported whatever decision would bring me peace. "They won't suddenly become the parents you deserved just because you're getting married," she said gently. "But this is your day too, and you should make the choice that feels right for you, not out of obligation." In the end, I sent formal invitations to my parents and Natalie, along with extended family members who had shown me kindness over the years. My grandfather William had passed away the previous winter, a profound loss that still ached. He would have been proud to see the man I'd become despite everything. My parents attended the small ceremony but seemed uncomfortable and out of place among people who genuinely celebrated Jessica and me. They left the reception early, citing the long drive home. Natalie didn't attend at all, claiming a scheduling conflict with a weekend yoga retreat. Rather than letting their lukewarm participation diminish our joy, we surrounded ourselves with chosen family friends. Who'd supported us. Jessica's warm and loving relatives, colleagues, who'd become mentors. The contrast between blood ties and chosen connections had never been clearer. Standing beside Jessica as we exchanged vows, I felt a sense of peace I'd fought hard to achieve. The path forward wasn't defined by what I'd lacked in childhood, but by what I was creating now. Love freely given and received relationships based on mutual respect, a life built on my own terms rather than in reaction to old wounds. The scars remained, but they no longer dictated my choices or defined my worth. That realization was perhaps the most significant victory in a battle I'd been fighting since childhood. 3 years into our marriage, Jessica and I had established comfortable routines in our life together. My career at Anderson Financial had advanced steadily with a recent promotion to senior advisor. Jessica had completed her master's degree in education and was teaching at a well-regarded elementary school. We had purchased our first home, a modest but charming 2-bedroom house, with a small garden that Jessica tended with enthusiasm. Our carefully constructed peace was interrupted by a phone call that would force me to confront the past I'd worked so hard to move beyond. My grandfather William had suffered a severe stroke and was not expected to recover. "You should come soon if you want to say goodbye," my Uncle Frank told me, his voice heavy with grief. "Hess asking for you." The 8-hour drive back to my hometown felt like traveling backward in time. Jessica sat beside me, offering silent support as familiar landmarks triggered memories I'd suppressed for years. My grandfather lay small and fragile in his hospital bed, monitors beeping steadily beside him. Despite his weakened state, his eyes lit up when I entered the room. He squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "My boy," he whispered, "you've made me so proud." I spent hours by his bedside, reminiscing about the woodworking projects we had completed together, the quiet conversations in his workshop that had sustained me through the darkest periods of my youth. His unconditional love had been a lifeline when I was drowning in my parents' indifference. Inevitably, my vigil overlapped with my parents' visits. The hospital room became uncomfortably crowded with unspoken grievances and painful history. My father seemed uncertain how to interact with me after years of minimal contact. My mother attempted superficial pleasantries as if our relationship had never fractured. Natalie made brief appearances, more concerned with documenting her grief for social media than actually comforting our grandfather. She had recently divorced her husband of 18 months and moved back into our parents' home temporarily, a regression they supported without question. On the 3rd day of my hospital visits, I encountered my grandfather alone, a rare moment without other family members present. His breathing had become more labored, his periods of lucidity briefer. "Timothy," he said, his voice barely audible, "I need to tell you something important." I leaned closer, holding his weathered hand carefully between mine. "Don't carry this hurt forever," he continued. "Not for your sake, not for theirs. Break the cycle. Stand firm in your truth, but don't let bitterness consume you. You're stronger than that. You're better than that." His words resonated deeply, touching a truth I had been circling in therapy for years. Holding on to resentment, justified as it might be, was still allowing my parents to influence my present happiness. The following evening, the family gathered in the hospital's waiting room during a shift change. The tension was palpable, as we awkwardly occupied the same space for the first time in years. My father broke the uncomfortable silence with words that ignited the confrontation that had been brewing for decades. "Timothy, your mother and I have been discussing Natalie's situation," he began. "Since you're doing so well financially, we thought perhaps you could help her get back on her feet. Maybe a loan to help her start over after the divorce." The audacity of the request left me momentarily speechless. Jessica tensed beside me, her hand finding mine in silent support. "Let me understand this," I finally responded, keeping my voice measured despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "You want me to give Natalie money when you've spent her entire life giving her everything while I worked for every opportunity I've ever had?" My father looked genuinely confused by my reaction. "That's what families do, Timothy. They help each other." "Do they?" I countered. "Because that hasn't been my experience of family at all." The dam finally broke. Years of therapy had given me the language and clarity to articulate what had happened to me in that house under their care. For my entire childhood, you showed me in countless ways that I mattered less than Natalie. My accomplishments were ignored while her mediocrity was celebrated. My needs were dismissed while hers were prioritized. You saved for her education but told me to find scholarships. You funded her multiple career attempts while I worked through college. You gave her a car for Christmas the same year you gave me a sweater. My mother's face flushed with indignation. "That is simply not true, Timothy. We loved you both equally. We still do." "Do you really believe that?" I asked, genuinely curious if they had so completely revised history in their minds. Because I can list hundreds of examples that prove otherwise. And I did. Calmly but firmly, I recounted specific instances from each stage of my life. The birthdays, the school events they skipped, the financial disparities, the emotional neglect. Jessica sat beside me, occasionally squeezing my hand when my voice wavered. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding eye contact. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, playing the role of the hurt parent, rather than acknowledging her part in causing pain. "You're exaggerating," my father attempted weakly. "All children think their siblings get preferential treatment. Ask Uncle Frank," I suggested, "or Aunt Meredith, or any of our neighbors or family friends. The favoritism was obvious to everyone, except you two." Uncle Frank, who had been silently witnessing our exchange, cleared his throat. "Richard," he said to my father, "the boy's not wrong. Diane and you always did favor Natalie. Everyone saw it. I tried to tell you years ago, but you wouldn't hear it." My father looked stricken, as if being confronted by his own brother somehow made the accusation more real than when it came from me. "We never meant to," my mother whispered, the first hint of genuine reflection I'd seen from her. "We didn't realize. I didn't want an apology driven by guilt or offered only because others were witnessing their discomfort. I wanted genuine understanding and acknowledgement of the harm they'd caused." "I'm not telling you this to hurt you," I explained, finding strength in the clarity therapy had given me. "I'm telling you because I need you to understand something important. I'm not going to be Natalie's financial safety net. I'm not going to compensate for the favoritism by now funding her as an adult. That pattern ends with me." Natalie, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during this exchange, suddenly found her voice. "So you're just going to abandon me when I'm struggling?" she demanded. "What kind of brother does that?" "The kind who was abandoned by his entire family for 25 years, I replied evenly. "I'm not abandoning you, Natalie. I'm establishing boundaries. There's a difference." I turned back to my parents. "I'm not interested in revenge or punishing you. I'm interested in truth and in breaking patterns that have caused harm. If you want a relationship with me moving forward, it needs to be based on respect and equality, not the dynamic that defined my childhood." The conversation continued for hours, moving through stages of denial, anger, bargaining, and finally tentative acceptance. My father, to my surprise, was the first to acknowledge reality. "I don't think I realized what we were doing," he admitted quietly. "When you lay it all out like that." He trailed off, seemingly unable to complete the thought. My mother vacillated between defensive justifications and tearful remorse. It was clear that truly accepting their role in my pain would require them to reconstruct their entire self-image as parents, a process that couldn't happen in a single conversation. Natalie remained largely self-focused, unable to see past her immediate needs to understand her role in the family dynamic. Her position as the golden child had shaped her as surely as my role as the scapegoat had formed me, leaving her entitled and unprepared for life's challenges. As dawn broke outside the hospital windows, we had reached no neat resolution, no Hollywood moment of perfect reconciliation. What we had achieved was the beginning of honesty, a foundation upon which something healthier might eventually be built. My grandfather passed away peacefully the following afternoon, with family gathered around his bed. In his final hours of consciousness, he squeezed my hand and nodded slightly, as if to say head, heard our confrontation, and approved of my stand. At his funeral, I delivered a eulogy celebrating the man who had seen me when my own parents couldn't, who had valued me when I felt worthless. Through tears, I promised to carry forward his legacy of integrity and kindness. As we prepared to return to Chicago, my father approached me awkwardly in the driveway of the family home. "I don't know if things can ever be right between us," he said, looking older and more uncertain than I had ever seen him. "But I want you to know, I'm thinking about everything you said. And I'm sorry, Timothy. I'm so sorry." It wasn't a complete acknowledgement, and it came decades too late. But it was a beginning, a small crack in the wall of denial they had built around their parenting choices. I didn't offer immediate forgiveness or false promises about the future. Instead, I simply nodded and said, "Thank you for listening. That's a start." The drive back to Chicago felt different from the journey there. I wasn't leaving with all the wounds magically healed or with the perfect family I'd longed for as a child. But I was leaving with something perhaps more valuable. My truth had finally been spoken aloud and at least partially heard. 1 year after the hospital confrontation, Jessica and I sat in our living room on a quiet Sunday afternoon. The subtle shift of seasons was visible through our windows, summer greenery, giving way to the first hints of autumn gold. I was reviewing investment portfolios for clients, while Jessica graded papers, a comfortable silence between us, broken only by occasional comments or shared observations. My phone buzzed with a text message from my mother, part of a tentative communication that had developed over the months since my grandfather's death. The relationship remained fragile, defined by careful boundaries, and an unspoken agreement to acknowledge the past without dwelling in it. "I thought of you today," her message read. "Saw a documentary on architecture that reminded me of those building models you used to make. Hope you're well." It wasn't profound or particularly insightful, but it represented something my mother had rarely shown during my childhood: genuine interest in me as an individual, with distinct preferences and memories. The past year had brought subtle but significant changes in my family dynamic. My parents, particularly my father, had made halting efforts to connect with me on my terms rather than theirs. Our conversations no longer revolved exclusively around Natalie. They asked questions about my work, my home, my interests. They listened to my responses, sometimes awkwardly, but with apparent sincerity. I harbored no illusions about dramatic transformation or perfect healing. Decades of entrenched behavior patterns don't dissolve overnight. But I recognized and cautiously appreciated their efforts to see me, perhaps truly, for the first time. For my part, I had made a conscious decision not to perpetuate resentment. As my grandfather had advised in his final days, I stood firmly in my truth, while refusing to let bitterness consume me. I maintained clear boundaries about what I would and wouldn't tolerate in our interactions, but I remained open to genuine change. My relationship with Natalie evolved along a different trajectory. Our confrontation had initially widened the gulf between us, but as months passed, something unexpected occurred. Removed from our parents' household and facing genuine consequences for her choices, for perhaps the first time, my sister began a halting process of self-reflection. "Timothy, I don't think I ever realized," she admitted during a rare phone call 6 months after our confrontation, "the way Mom and Dad treated you versus me. I mean, I knew they gave me stuff, but I never thought about what it meant for you." Her acknowledgement was imperfect and still centered largely on her experience rather than mine, but it represented growth I hadn't thought her capable of. She had found steady employment for the first time in her adult life and was living within her means without parental subsidy. Jessica's pregnancy, confirmed in early spring, brought new perspective to my thoughts about family. As I placed my hand on her still flat stomach, imagining the life growing within, I felt equal measures of joy and apprehension. What if I don't know how to be a good parent? I whispered one night, giving voice to my deepest fear. What if I repeat the patterns I grew up with? Jessica turned to face me in the darkness, her expression serious but tender. Timothy, the fact that you're asking that question already puts you miles ahead, she said. You know exactly what not to do because you've lived it. And you'll have me to call you out if you ever start showing favoritism. I continued with therapy, now focused less on processing past wounds and more on preparing for healthy parenthood. Dr. Howard helped me understand how to break generational patterns and create the nurturing environment I had been denied. You have an advantage, he explained. You're so conscious of what was missing in your childhood that you're unlikely to accidentally recreate it. The challenge will be finding balance, not overcompensating in ways that might create different problems. As Jessica's pregnancy progressed, I reflected deeply on the lessons my painful childhood had ultimately taught me. Despite the hurt, or perhaps because of it, I had developed strengths that now served me well: resilience, self-reliance, empathy for those who feel unseen, and the capacity to create meaningful connections based on mutual respect rather than obligation. I had learned that family isn't defined solely by blood but by consistent care and genuine regard. The people who had supported me through my darkest periods, Gerald at work, Jessica's parents, my grandfather friends, who had become as close as siblings, these were my true family, chosen and cherished. Most importantly, I had learned that my worth wasn't determined by my parents' inability to see it. Their limitations had shaped my childhood but need not define my future. 6 months into Jessica's pregnancy, my parents visited our home for the first time. The occasion was awkward but not hostile, marked by tentative attempts at normal conversation and their genuine excitement about becoming grandparents. As they prepared to leave, my father paused at the door, looking simultaneously older and somehow humbler than the imposing figure of my youth. "We're trying to do better, Timothy," he said simply. "We can't change the past, but we're trying to be different now." I nodded, appreciating the acknowledgement, without offering false assurances that everything was forgiven. Some hurts run too deep for simple absolution, but acknowledging them creates space for something new to grow in their place. Natalie called the following week, asking if she could visit before the baby arrived. "I won't stay long," she promised. "I just want to see you and Jessica, maybe talk about some things. I've been doing a lot of thinking." Her visit surprised me. For the first time in our adult lives, we had a conversation that wasn't transactional or superficial. She spoke of her own struggles with identity after years of being defined primarily by our parents, excessive attention and support. "I never had to figure anything out on my own," she admitted, as we walked through a nearby park. "They always swooped in to fix everything. I know you saw it as favoritism, and it was, but it also made me completely unprepared for real life." I could acknowledge the truth in her observation without minimizing the damage the same dynamic had caused me. Both experiences were valid: the golden child and the scapegoat, each damaged in different ways by the same dysfunctional pattern. As autumn leaves began to fall around our neighborhood, Jessica and I prepared the nursery for our child. I assembled the crib, my hands steadier than my emotions, as I contemplated the responsibility ahead. "I make you this promise," I whispered to the empty crib. "You will never wonder if you're loved. You will never feel invisible or unworthy. You will be seen and heard and valued exactly as you are." The journey from wounded child to expectant father had been long and often painful. The scars remained visible if you knew where to look: periods of self-doubt, occasional struggles with trust, the reflexive surprise when someone valued my opinion or celebrated my success. But those scars no longer defined me. They were simply evidence of battles fought and survived testimonies to resilience, rather than permanent disabilities. As I reflect on this journey from invisibility to self-defined worth, I recognize that true healing isn't about erasing the past or pretending the hurt never happened. It's about extracting meaning from suffering, transforming pain into wisdom, and using that wisdom to create something better. I can't change the childhood I experienced, but I can ensure it ends with me. The cycle of favoritism and emotional neglect that shaped my early years will not touch my child. Instead, they will inherit the hard-won lessons of equality, unconditional acceptance, and the courage to stand firmly in one's truth. If you've ever felt unseen in your own family, know that your worth isn't determined by others' inability to recognize it. The validation you seek from parents or siblings cannot fulfill you if it comes at the cost of your authentic self. True healing begins with honoring your own experience and building connections with those who see and value you completely. Have you experienced family favoritism? How did you cope with it? And what lessons did you take from the experience? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more content about overcoming family dysfunction and building healthier relationships. And remember, you deserve to be seen, to be heard, and to be loved, not for what you achieve or provide, but simply for who you are.